Only mode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us once again for another FM Academy webinar presentation on FileMaker 12. Today our presentation is on FileMaker Server file management, and our presenter today is Colin Keefe, who is a project manager at IT Solutions and also a career hands-on FileMaker developer with certifications in pretty much every version of FileMaker Pro. And has a lot of experience with the server product. Please help me welcome Colin, and Colin, please take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the FileMaker Academy webinar series. My name is Colin Keefe. As Mark said, I'm a project manager at IT Solutions, which is one of the FileMaker Academy partners who are hosting this webinar series. And today's topic is server file management. On the agenda for today, this is what we've got on the plate for this session. We're going to talk about what's changed about the standard full backups you're used to if you've previously done server administration. We're going to explore what progressive backups are all about, and we're going to spend some time talking about remote container data storage. So I admit I picked this topic, so I don't really have anyone to blame, but one of the problems I face with it is basically that servers are just a really, really boring topic. Either you're going to geek out on this topic so much that you're going to catch me on the little nitpicky details that I get wrong or omit, or you're going to fall asleep. So I'm going to try and take what should be a liability and try to make it a strength, because the way I think about it, servers should be boring. And just bear with me for a minute here. When I say that they should be boring, I don't mean mechanical machinery, and I don't mean cute babies. I mean server farm boring. You should just yawn looking at this picture. You should not have this life where, this ancient curse of Chinese curse of server management where your life is interesting because of your servers, right? You should not be living in interesting times. If you're paying any kind of unscheduled attention to your server, I can pretty much guarantee it's not because you've got an automated email telling you, guess what, you won the lottery. It's usually going to be something bad. So the good news is that FileMaker has done a great job improving the server product, so we have better tools to improve reliability, integrity, and security. And backups are a huge component in that. And remote container data storage has an element in there, too, in terms of performance and reliability. So we're going to be spending the bulk of our time talking about that so that your life can be less filled with road bumps and more room for smooth sailing. So those are my pictures. You're not going to get any more. We're going to go into the real thing here. I had to try and make it not boring. That was my attempt. We'll see who stays awake. So let's talk about backups. So I just want to do a comparison between FileMaker 11 and FileMaker 12 and sort of give some background here. In FileMaker 11, if you've had any kind of server administration background, you know that backups have always been written as complete backup files every time. So if you had a schedule that ran on an hourly basis, you would have a backup that would begin at 11 a.m., for example, and then, depending on the size of the file, would end at some point in time. And then during that period, people could go in and modify data in the database and do various things, but there was a performance hit while that backup was running because the server was trying to do two different things. And then at the end of that period, you would have this brief pause. The database would pause, and nobody would be able to do anything in it while the changes that happened during that backup period were written on top of the backup file. So it was a short pause, but there was a real, basically the database stops for a second or two. So there are these two components there that existed in the backup architecture for Server 11. That hasn't really changed, but there have been new nuances added to the 12 product that allow us to sort of work around that problem. One of them is that we've got this idea of the idea of hard linking. So the idea here basically is that rather than, you know that if you have a file on the server that hasn't been touched in 8 hours and you have an hourly backup, there's really no reason to have 8 full backups of a file which hasn't changed. And that's what was happening in 11. What we do now in 12 basically is the last backup that, the last modified backup is treated as the last pristine backup. And then every time that file is marked for backup again, instead of creating a real backup file, a hard link is created to that file. This saves on disk space, and it saves on backup times because if you don't have to back up the file, then you're not writing to disk, and you're not loading down the server with that. So the metaphor that you could use for this, it's not an exact analogy, is the idea of the alias or the shortcut. On the server in the backups directory, you're going to see multiple links, multiple instances of this file. But the alias shortcut analogy is incomplete. And I'll just kind of open up the backups folder here and kind of show what is going on in here. If I have, for example, I'm just going to collapse all these. I've been modifying my invoices. I have two files hosted right now. I have an invoices file and I have the server sample data, the one that just mounts whenever you install the server product. And I know that I haven't touched that in a while. If I start collapsing, opening these up, you'll see that I have, this file here, which was modified on March 20, blah, blah, blah. And as I go through here and get closer and closer to today, I'm going to see that this file was actually modified yesterday, 7:19 a.m. This one was modified on April 30, and this one was modified on April 30, right? These two files, this hasn't been modified since probably, it probably goes about 2 back. So these are actually the same file. They're not two separate files. So this idea of the alias, being able to create an alias of a file and put it somewhere, and then you can kind of move the alias around, that's where the analogy breaks down. Because I can, with an alias, I can, delete the alias and the original file isn't damaged. I can rename the alias. I can do whatever I want with it. With a hard-linked file, if you move this file, you're moving the file. These are all just pointers to the same file. And so FileMaker has put in some protections to this file where if I try to do something with this, I'm going to go ahead and open this up and try to modify it. I'm going to get this message. This action cannot be performed because this file has multiple hard links and is not modifiable. This is a wrapper protection that the FileMaker client has kind of put around the product so that you don't do stupid things with the file. Now, hard linking is not a FileMaker unique technology. It's used across the board in all OSs. They're just implementing it in this way to get around the problem of, basically backing up things too many times. Now, I think I explained that pretty well. This kind of points out some things that we should note, and these are things that probably you should have been doing anyway prior to Server 12. Basically, you should be treating the backup directory as a pristine region not to be modified. It should be like the inner sanctum. It's the repository of all your, all the most precious stuff, your data, and you should never be touching it. You shouldn't move a backup file. You should never open up a backup file in its original directory. What you should be doing instead is making a copy of that file and using that. So rather than go in here and try to monkey with this, I'm just going to open up yesterday's backup and see what kind of data is in there and maybe change something, we're treating this area as non-modifiable. So instead, you're going to copy this, right, and then put it on your desktop or whatever. And now FileMaker is forcing some of that on you, before you could do this, even though it wasn't advised. All right, so that brings us to progressive backups. This is a new backup model in FileMaker Server 12. The basic difference here compared to a full backup is that incremental changes between backups are written to a file on a periodic basis. Instead of a copy the whole file operation, we're talking about copying just the changes that happen between instances of the backup. And the way to think about this is there's this kind of leapfrogging effect, and I'm going to kind of talk it through in words and then show it on the server itself. Let's say you have a progressive backup set on a 5-minute schedule. So every 5 minutes it's writing to a new backup file based on the progression of changes that have happened in those 5 minutes. The first time you run that, you're going to get a full backup file, sort of a baseline of data that the progressive backup is going to use. And then 5 minutes are going to progress, and it's going to keep track of changes that have happened in that file. And at the end of the 5-minute period, it's going to write another full backup. So now it has 2. Okay, the one's 5 minutes old and one's 0 minutes old. It's going to move forward in time another 5 minutes, tracking more and more changes. And then when it gets to that 10-minute mark, basically the third instance of this thing running, it's going to take the changes that happened between the 5 and 10-minute mark and write them to the older file. So now I have a 5-minute old file and a 10-minute-old file which is now fully modified and now is 0 minutes old. Okay, so they kind of leapfrog each other so that you always have one backup which is no older than the interval that you set. So we're going to poke around FileMaker and take a look at that. And I'll start with the server admin console itself. One place you're not going to find these progressive backups is in the schedules. You can't go and edit or create a schedule that has anything to do with progressive backups. That's because there are a couple things that are different about the way backups run. For one thing, progressive backups are continuous. They run all the time. There's no start or end time that you set. Okay, so in a regular schedule, I can go in here and say that I want to run a schedule, every hour between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. All of this stuff you don't get to choose. All right. Another thing that you don't get to choose with progressive backup is which databases to use. Everything in this dialog doesn't have anything to do with progressive backups. Instead, what you're going to be doing is going to Database Server, and for some reason, in the Folders section, we have this option down here, Progressive Backup Folder. I guess because you have to specify a backup folder, they put it in this section. But this is basically where you enable progressive backups. You enable this bit, and you set a save interval. Now, I have done an inadvisable thing, and I'll talk about that. I set my progressive backup folder to live inside the FileMaker Server data folder, just because it was quick and easy for me to do. The best practice for setting your progressive backups folder optimally is on a separate drive. And the idea behind that is that because you have this thing running continuously, every 5 minutes writing changes, it can cause load on the disk. Not a lot of load, but there's some performance hit. So the idea is you have one drive which is writing all your live data as people are interacting with the database, and one drive which is writing progressive backups. And so the disk writes don't interfere with each other. And remember, memory is faster than disk writes, and so you want to minimize the disk writes that you have to make. The second most optimal, I guess, would be a separate partition so that you can defragment one drive or another on an as-needed basis. But definitely, you should not be putting it in the FileMaker Server data directory. You're going to want to put it somewhere else. Enough said about that. I'm going to show you what things look like in the progressive backup folder. So here's my progressive backups folder, which I specified. And there are really only two things here that you're going to be concerned with. I'm going to show you the other stuff just so you kind of know why it doesn't matter to you. These two folders, changes and copies, are things that FileMaker Server uses to manage the whole progressive backup process. If you open this, you'll see that there are intervals and things are going on in here. And the reason why this is never going to be useful to you is because if you open up one of these files, I have one on the desktop here that I thought I'd just kind of poke around and play with. There's nothing here that you're going to be able to do some clever hacking trick to parse out XML data of something that you want to grab in between increments. It's just not for you. This is for the server. The two files that you're going to be concerned with in progressive backups are the ones that are time-stamped. And you'll see that this one has I have this running on a 5-minute increment, so I have one that ran at 14:05. I guess that's 1:05. I don't know what the timestamp is, but you get the idea. It's every 5 minutes. And then when it runs again at another 5-minute interval, this will become 14:15, and we'll have updated data. And so if you want to use one of these incremental backups, you basically, you copy it, and you put it on your desktop. You're not touching anything in here. You don't want to modify anything in here, okay? You definitely do not want to open one of these while this process is going on, because remember, FileMaker is using this on a pretty continuous basis. So back to considerations for this. The directory should be outside the FileMaker Server directory. And again, because we are not using the backup schedule routine to set this, this is something that happens automatically on the server side. It applies to all hosted files. If you have 125 hosted files, all 125 files are going to get a progressive backup. You can't select which files happen. It's continuous. There's no start or end time as there are with regular schedules. And the same rules that make sense for regular backup folders, including setting up antivirus exclusions apply here. You don't want antivirus to be running on your progressive backup folders, and you probably want to have your progressive backup folders backed up as well, although it's probably more important that you get your standard backups. Which brings me to my last point. This is not a replacement for full backup. It's complementary. And I don't know if that's a hard and fast rule so much as just my personal opinion that the more different kinds of backups and more delivery paths you have for backups, the better. You can't have too many ways to restore your data. So I would recommend having just about everything turned on that you can to backup stuff. Have a regular hourly or whatever tolerance your user base has for schedules that run during the workday. Regular daily backups, regular weekly, regular monthly with clones, all that stuff, and then have this for those situations where you need to go back 5 minutes because something drastic happened. All right. So I'm going to talk about external container data storage. I should say that I have a feeling this presentation will run to about 2:40, and we're going to have lots of time for questions. But I do have some other stuff that I'd like to talk about in Server. There's a lot of changes that I think are worth exploring. So if we do have time, I'm going to be spending a little bit of time on that, and then we'll open up for questions. So external container storage or remote data storage, however you want to phrase it. So what is it? It's not this, and it's not souped up Tupperware. That joke is funnier if I get the slide up first. And it's really this. Container fields, which are managed very differently in FileMaker 12 than they are in 11. It's a mixture of how things are handled in the client and how things are handled on the server. So we'll dig right in and talk about it. There are a lot of moving parts here. It's really not that complicated, but the pieces that you have to touch in different places are probably not obvious how they all interact. So we'll try to explore that. But first, let's do a comparison. In FileMaker 11, container fields really only held data in 2 different ways. You could store binary data, meaning images, movies, documents, whatever, inside the FileMaker file in a container field, or you could store a reference to that file, and then FileMaker would find the file and display it. There are drawbacks to both of those. If you store inside the FileMaker file, if you store a 5 gig movie file, and well, let's say a 1 gig movie file inside a container field, then you're expanding the size of your database by 1 gig. And then that makes your file that much fatter to back up, which can affect performance for that much longer. If you end up with 5 gigs of data in there, then that's 5 gigs that you have to back up on whatever schedule you're doing. So there's a drawback to storing it that way. Conversely, if you store a reference to a file, then you run into the issue of, I should probably explain how that works. If you store a reference to a file in FileMaker 11, you are pointing to the file as it exists on a shared drive, some kind of mounted drive, or on your local machine. So in both of those scenarios, you run into this issue of fragility, right? So if I have it on a mounted drive, the user runs the risk of not having that drive mounted, so that when they go to a record that has a file reference to display the data, it breaks and it can't display the data. And if I just kind of throw stuff up from my local machine, nobody's ever going to see it. So there's a lot of opportunity for breakage and fragility in that scenario. The upside is that it doesn't take up extra room inside the FileMaker file. So in FileMaker 12, they worked pretty hard to resolve a lot of these problems by introducing this concept of remote container storage. So let's talk about that. Remote container storage is maintained by FileMaker Server, so it's managed pretty much completely by the server itself. And how it works is if I set a field definition to store the data externally, then that tells FileMaker Server, I'm going to handle this. I'm going to keep the images or whatever it is on the server. I may optionally encrypt it depending on how the field definition is set. And when people ask for it, I'm going to deliver it, over the WAN or over the network. This allows us to have no broken references because FileMaker Server always knows where everything is. There's no file bloat because the file isn't actually contained in the file. So that makes the backups run a lot faster. And the data can be encrypted. So I can opt to say I want all of the database, all the files that I'm storing on FileMaker Server, have them encrypted so that when they're delivered, I'm sorry, there are two options here. I should probably clarify what I mean by encrypted because there are two different ways you can encrypt. You can encrypt the data at rest on the server, so I can have all my invoice documents or maybe legal documents stored on the server that I can access through FileMaker. But as they sit at rest on the server, they can be encrypted so that somebody, if they got onto the machine, they can't actually open up the files and do anything with them. I can also stream the data and deliver it on demand. So if I have a very large video file that I want to stream in a container field, I can do that. There's a wrinkle here where I can't stream encrypted data. And I guess I should explain a little bit about why that is, but I'm going to hold off on that until we actually get into the server admin console. And I'm going to jump back up to the issue of thumbnails. You can optionally define a field to display thumbnails. Define a file to display thumbnails so that when people view data, a thumbnail is generated on the fly to fit the size of the container field as it's displayed on the layout, which makes the network traffic a lot easier. You don't have to deliver a 500 megabyte image. You deliver a 128K image, and then it's as needed. So, and the last point I'll make about the whole streaming thing before I actually show you how this stuff works in the database, in the whole FileMaker ecosystem, is that streaming data uses a different protocol from FileMaker Server, meaning it's a different component on the server that uses a different data stream. So there's less of a hit on performance because FileMaker can use load balancing between the different components and sort of manage them separately. So this part I'm just going to open up and kind of talk through the different pieces, starting with FileMaker Server, because that's the simplest piece to talk about because there's really only one thing to talk about. If I go to security, I have this little secure connections, SSL, secure connections to database server. So when this is enabled, what you're basically saying is I want all the data coming in and out of FileMaker to be encrypted. Okay, so why does that affect streaming? Why can't I stream data while the server has got this bit enabled? Well, FileMaker is basically saying we can't ensure that the streaming data is intercepted en route. Okay, this is not about data at rest on the server. This is about data being delivered. We can't ensure that the streaming media is not intercepted somewhere on the internet. So we're just not going to do it that way. We're going to deliver the data in one giant clump, right? We're not streaming it. We're going to deliver it, encrypted, and then it will be decrypted on the client side. So we remove that issue of security over the WAN. That is the fundamental reason why you can't stream and have this bit enabled at the same time. Otherwise, FileMaker is kind of breaking its promise to have secure data, right? So that kind of is the only thing that we need to be concerned with on the server side. I'm going to go ahead and hide this guy. Let's get into FileMaker itself, and I'm going to open, what am I going to open? I think I will open this guy here. I'll jump to one of these records. All right. All right, you see this guy just started loading right away. I'm going to just pause him for a second and talk about stuff from the schema level first. So I'm going to jump into Manage Database and shrink this a little bit so we can kind of see the different options that we have. So you know what I'm talking about when I point out the different stuff. I have 5 fields on this layout. I have a movie secure field, which isn't really any different from the document secure field. That's this one and this one. I just had them so that I could show the different data types that you can store in a container field. But they're both configured the same way in the schema. And then I have two container fields which are stored externally as open, not secure. That's this one and this one right here. And I'll talk about why I have those two different in a little bit. And then I have this one, which is basically the FileMaker 11 way of storing containers. It's just in the file or as a reference, and that's this guy down here. All right, so if I jump into here, let's take a look at this for a moment. In the storage options for a container field, you have the option to turn on store container data externally. And once you enable that, it's going to give a relative position on the server where the data is going to be stored, and then it's going to be either secure or open. These are your options available to you. So I set up two fields here and here that are already configured and have data on the server that I can show you, so you can see the difference between them. So there's movie document, secure, and document open. I'm going to cancel out of this for a moment and jump back over here. And let's take a look at the databases folder. And I don't know if you saw this earlier when I was kind of poking around, but in the databases folder, I have at the root level of every database folder, inside the database folder, there is going to be, whatever databases are in that folder, and then this RC data folder. So I have two databases on the server. I have invoices, and then I have sample. And you'll note that this is in a subfolder, right? The FM server sample folder. It has its own RC data folder. So there's one here and one here. It's not per file, it's per directory. But once you get inside, then you have this per file folder, okay? If I open up this, wrong guy, I have this per file folder. This one is for invoices. This one is for FileMaker Server sample. I'm going to close this one just for clarity. I'm going to open up the invoices file, and now I have this files folder. So these are the files for this invoice database. This is a little bit confusing because the table that I'm on for this database is named the same as the file, but this is the table name for the file invoice. And inside that, I have two folders, okay? One of them is customers, which has this document open field. This is I'm probably confusing this a little bit, but the document open field has container data stored in here. So this images JPEG. If I open that up, don't do this at home, you're going to see this images, which is basically this guy down here, right? So that is open storage. I'm going to jump back into here again. Document open. It's being stored open in this document open folder, okay? And it's not encrypted. I just opened it up, right? I should point out, by the way, that FileMaker in no way is suggesting that you use this as some kind of document share outside of the FileMaker ecosystem. Do not turn on sharing for this folder or try to game this in any way as a documents repository outside of, pushing them through the FileMaker client. The FileMaker server won't like it. It's just a bad idea. I could probably come up with more reasons beyond that, but not in the time allotted or that my brain can really come up with right now. But the point is that these are open, they are unencrypted, and that there is a structure that FileMaker is using to store this data that you shouldn't have to care about. I'm just showing so you know what it's like and what all this extra stuff is that wasn't there in Server 11. You'll also note that there's this secure folder. And if you open that up, you're going to see a bunch of gibberish. So these are the encrypted image, whatever kind of media we're storing is getting sliced and diced somehow that I don't really understand, and you don't need to understand. But just know that when you have secure data, it is being encrypted on the server, and then FileMaker is doing what it needs to do to decrypt on the fly and to manage that data for you. Okay, so if I jump back in here and I take my document open folder and I change it to secure storage, what is going to happen? Let's see. So I set that. Now, container data transfer. There are a couple things that happen when you change the type or you change the way the data is stored. You get this container data transfer option. And I'm going to not do this right now. I'm just going to click close. But the idea here is that if you're changing from encrypted to unencrypted, or if you're changing from stored as a regular, old style FileMaker 11 container field to an externally stored data type, you need some way of getting the data into that new format. And this process does that. So if you have an old style container field and you're switching it to the external stored, you're going to get prompted to do this. It will move all that data to the server for you and basically crunch down the size of your file. But it's a process that needs to happen. It doesn't just magically go there. So that's why you get prompted when you do this. I'm going to click close. I'm also going to point out that I'm going to stop my son from riding around. Hopefully, there it goes. Okay. That you can get to that same transfer dialog through this new option, Manage Containers. What's that, you say? All right. So there are a couple things here. I'm not going to look at this one yet to pretend you didn't see that. Storage, this kind of shows us where all the base directories are for this. I have to confess with you, I haven't played around with this too much, and I don't really know how it's managed. I'm still kind of exploring it. New product. We're not all geniuses. The transfer data button, however, is enabled because some changes have been made to the schema that allow us to optionally transfer stuff over. Okay. The document open field was changed because I changed it from open to encrypted. This other one was actually a demo that I was going to bring up next. I have a field that was stored locally, and I chose to manage externally. And so that's showing up in that list. That's this field right here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change my field down here, document embedded, to external as well. Not that. I'll just do open. Why not? And I'm going to click OK. I'll get that transfer dialog. And look, here's my new one. It's asking me to transfer. Now, I am kind of curious to see how quickly we'll see this change. So I'm going to go ahead and see if it starts throwing stuff in here. Transfer. Oh, and it's done. Well, that's nice. Let's see. And in customers, I have two new things. That's interesting. Document is embedded, and there's my little Philly FileMaker badge. Yes, we're Philly FileMaker over here. Yeah, so that's from the data transfer context. That's how all that stuff works. I am going to stop my son from riding his bike. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to the data formatting and see this interactive contact checkbox. I'm going to turn that off and just, well, actually, I'll just turn off playback automatically. That'll be one start to this. And now my son will wait for me to click him, right? And I can also say, well, I don't even want it to be interactive content. If I switch it to images, it's just going to show me I believe it's just a thumbnail of the image, right? Because I'm saying I'm going to treat this as a file, not as rich media to be played. I'm going to switch it back to interactive content and start playback automatically. Now, this interactive content is part of the whole streaming thing, right? So if I have, again, on FileMaker Server, this thing unchecked, the secure connections to unchecked, then functionally speaking, when I have that enabled for a field, the data is going to immediately begin streaming and start playing, or if you have the playback automatically set, or if I get a PDF, a large PDF with a lot of different pages on it, I'll immediately begin to scroll through the pages and can start interacting with it, even though the entire file isn't delivered. If I have this enabled and this enabled, FileMaker is going to ignore this for the purpose of streaming. It'll still be interactive. You'll still be able to play around with it, but it's not going to stream anything. It's going to deliver the entire packet down. All right. There is one more thing that I want to show in the Manage Containers section, and that's this idea of thumbnails. Okay, so this is a file-wide setting. I can generate and store thumbnails for images, and the idea here basically is I don't want to deliver a ton of data down to the client, right? If I have really, really big images, why send the whole thing if they're viewing it through a little 200 by 200 pixel container? So I'll talk about the difference between permanent and temporary in a second, but I may be wrong about what I'm about to say, but I think I'm right. The thumbnail that comes down to the container is specified by the container dimensions. So when you're on a layout and the layout has a field on it that has data in it that is 4,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, but the container size is 100 by 100. I believe that it comes down like maybe 10% larger than that as like a buffer for some reason, and then displays inside. So it's it'll be 210 by 210 or 220 by 220, just big enough to sort of have a little play there. And I don't know yet what happens when you resize images, if it like pulls down a new thumbnail or what. Still sort of exploring that. There is an answer out there, I just don't know it yet. So the difference between these permanent and temporary storage is it's a lot like a web browser, right? If you set a web browser to delete all cookies when you close the window for security reasons, it'll clear your cookies. This is very similar. So thumbnails come down from the server, and they're stored locally on the client, so that when you scroll through things, it doesn't have to ask for the thing again every time you go to a record. But your options are basically, do I want to get rid of that at the end of the session of when the database is closed, or do I want to keep it there? And you may want to keep it there for performance reasons, because once it's there, you don't have to get it again, right? And then pretty much everything's local. There is a security risk with that, right? But the good news is that if the data is encrypted, then FileMaker will store the cache objects encrypted as well. Still, for a lot of people, temporary storage might just make you feel better about it, and you may be doing some unencrypted storage. So those are kind of your options there. All right, I was going to say something else about that, but I kind of blanked on it. So that's the end of the presentation in terms of container data storage and the backup schedules. I just kind of want to take 5 minutes and talk about a couple other things on the server side itself in terms of performance, which I think is really interesting. I don't know if this is getting covered in other presentations. Is it, Mark? Are we talking about performance at all? A little bit. A little bit? All right, then I don't want to puncture any bubbles. Yeah, maybe I should skip it. Do we have any questions lined up? Okay, all right. Why don't we go straight to questions, because we got about 20 minutes. We might as well use them.
Thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. We have a lot of questions, so I just wanted to mention, if we do not get to every question on this list, we will definitely post them all when we post our blog posting to FileMakerAcademy.com, the FM Academy official website, and we'll try to get as many answers as we can. But if we do miss your question, I apologize. We will definitely get them all up on the website, so just hang in there. But so I'll just go in order here from first requested. So a hard link links to one file, but what happens if the backed up hard linked file somehow got corrupt? For example, due to a faulty disk sector, can you choose to schedule a daily FileMaker 11 style backup to avoid this problem, and then subsequent backups in the next 24 hours, hard link to that specific day's full backup?
I think the answer to that is no. Right. You cannot change the way that the FileMaker, the standard full backup process runs. There's no bit to say, oh, I want to use hard links or not. I don't know if there's a good answer for that. Either I could think of some janky things, like have somebody modify the database every day, but that's not the answer that you want. And I don't know that there is a good one.
Okay. If I put my FileMaker database on a third-party outside server to run a secure SSL, what questions, such as who has access to the hardware, do you recommend asking to determine the best option? as many questions as you can think of would be appreciated. So I guess that's vetting the hosting provider.
Read that one to me again. That might be difficult to answer.
Yeah, I understand. If I put a FileMaker database on a third-party outside server to run a secure SSL, what questions should I ask? I guess it would be nice if they were SAS 70 at their data center, SAS 70 compliance or SAS 70 audited, I think is the appropriate term, if they've been audited by an independent SAS 70 certified auditor. It's not a compliance or a certification. It's just that you've been audited by an accountant who does SAS 70 auditing. But that's a security protocol for data centers, so that would be a good option.
Yeah.
Can progressive backups be on external or network disks?
I suppose they could. I don't know if I would recommend it any more than I would recommend. Well, external disks, yes. I mean, you could mount an external disk, to your machine. A network-attached device, I would not recommend against. I would not recommend. You could do it to a SAN, not to a NAS. Okay, if you want to make that kind of distinction. Any kind of network-attached service, I would say no. But if you have maybe a SAN, you could do. Yeah, I'm going to punt on that one. I think that's about as close as I'm going to get to an answer. I will say that there are smart people listening, so if you hear something that you have an answer to, feel free to type it in, and we'll see if we can get it.
In the case where FileMaker 12 container fields are used to store files externally, for each full individual backup, is the directory containing the external files also backed up and duplicated, thus generating a potentially very large storage need?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I don't know the answer to that, so let's find out. If I go to my backups folder, I believe I did see remote container data in here, and I'm looking, and I see stuff. I sure do. Now, again, with hard links, I don't know if those are mirrors or not as well. So I think there's a trade-off here between what FileMaker is doing to save on drive space and what it's adding to the burden of the disk, in terms of space. So I think the answer is yes, it's doing that.
Okay. How do you suggest doing antivirus checks and not destroy the data files? Great question.
Yeah, so it depends on the antivirus software you're using. If you're using like what's the Norton one, the Data Shield or
the Norton Security.
Yeah. Most of them will have an exclusion routine where you go in. It's basically configured to just check everything. But you can set manual exclusions where you say, I'm going to exclude the FileMaker backups folder. I'm going to exclude the FileMaker databases folder, and so on. In some cases, you may want to go so far as to exclude the temp folder, which is the hidden folder on the C drive on Windows. I have done that before with sort of janky cases where, some antivirus service was actually interfering with the temp files that FileMaker generates when it's running. But generally speaking, you should be okay with excluding the databases folder and the backups folder. I hope that answered what you were asking.
Okay. Are we going to cover how to restore from a progressive backup, which I don't think we did a restore?
No, I mean, we can talk about it. The restore is the way you would do a restore from any FileMaker backup. It's a FileMaker file. So your options are basically, it depends on what your purposes of restoring are. If your purpose is to just revert to an earlier backup, you copy that file and you move it into the FileMaker Server directory using the upload tool. If your purpose is to restore data from a backup into a clone, it's the same way it was before with regular standard backups. You're grabbing that file for the data, and you are importing it into a clone.
So this question is how do we recommend optimizing system RAM for FileMaker Server? I think we probably, because there is another server.
That's going to come up.
We'll definitely leave that one. Yeah, sorry. If this does not get answered in the session on server performance, we will definitely respond to it. So I'll leave it. I'll make note of it. Is there any way to store a file somewhere other than on the server itself? For example, a shortcut on the server pointing to another drive.
Is that a reference to a document file or a database file?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Under the traditional 11 architecture, yes, you could point to store a reference to a file on a network drive, and you would encounter the issues associated with that, with the drive not being mounted and then the resource not being available to display. Okay. I'm not sure if that was the question, but that was my answer.
Do remote container files get backed up as well? And I think that was answered yet. To encrypt the files in a container, we must have FileMaker Server 12, or can we do the same with FileMaker Pro 12, working as a peer-to-peer?
That's a good question. You can encrypt peer-to-peer. What you can't do peer-to-peer is stream. Yeah, because streaming, this is not really to your question, streaming requires a web server. That's what's delivering the data. But you can encrypt the data locally, on a peer-to-peer network or just in a single user file.
Do remote containers support any raw image formats? Actually, I don't know what that means, so sorry.
I kind of do. I think, did I save that help file that I looked up earlier?
To find that exact answer?
Yeah, the file formats that are, it's in the help file. There's a nice little document in, or matrix in the container section of the help file for FileMaker that lists the types of files that are supported.
All right. So it's actually interesting. This is probably going to be a follow-up to this one, but I have a huge legacy file with 50,000 files on a file system. How can I make those accessible through FileMaker? I imagine we probably have to write something about importing them into FileMaker.
Does it say anything about how they are attached to FileMaker? Are they references?
I think it's just a file system with 50,000 files.
Okay. So. Yeah, if you have a FileMaker file that has embedded data or a file stored as a reference, I believe the data transfer routine will at least handle the embedded files, and I believe it may also handle the references. I'm going to have to punt on that. But yeah, if it's completely outside the FileMaker database, you need some kind of specialized routine to get it in.
Okay. Does file encryption affect database speed?
The SSL encryption over the WAN does, or over the network does. I don't know if I could assign a percentage to it, maybe like 2% drop in speed. The encryption of the files themselves, I don't know the answer to.
Okay. Is there any is there any advantage to using WebViewer versus container for purposes of accessing files or images through the database?
There probably are, and the person who wrote this is probably familiar with Super Container, which is how all this kind of dynamic media used to be handled in 11. If you needed to get around the whole drawbacks to the way container fields were handled in 11. 360works has this plugin called Super Container, which allows for this sort of streaming, media management kind of stuff, using a web server as the back end. I believe on FM forums, if you go to FM forums, the people from Super Container have posted a pretty objective comparison chart between their product and the new features in FileMaker 12, and it may outline some advantages. I can't think of them offhand. I'm sure there are, and they probably have to do with the particulars of the product, and they might enlarge the scope of what can be done.
Is there any new way of getting the metadata from, for example, a JPEG? A new way.
Oh, yeah. The little bits and pieces that you can do if you get as text or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I haven't tried.
So there might be something new in that.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes, so I'll just take a look. Let's see. How about document open? Text. Make that a calculation. Pardon me while I develop for once. Let's see. Document open. Do get as text. And let's see what it has. And that should throw it out right down there. It looks about the same. There is this little secure, I mean, that's just the path where it's stored, I guess. I don't know how much that tells you about anything, but yeah.
Okay. The difference between FM Server 12 and Pro 12 working as a server and dealing with containers is with FM Server 12 we don't need to wait to interact with the files. Is this correct? The rest is equal.
There's one piece in there that is correct,
okay.
which is that server does allow for interactive content. I would not in any way compare the two products as server products as equal. Right. Sure. And I think the scope of my answer for that is beyond this. But yeah, if you have an opportunity to use server for any reason whatsoever, so. you will save money in the long term, I guarantee you.
Yeah, and with the annual licensing, if you're in a VLA arrangement, it can be really affordable with FileMaker's annual licensing. Yes. If storing thumbnails, how do you determine when FM shows a thumbnail or the full resolution image?
How do you determine?
Or do you, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, there is at the file level, you have managed containers, which basically says turn it on or turn it off, right? And at that point, I don't think there's any more granularity that you can do to say, I'm going to, even if I optimize for images, there's no way for me to say what is the thumbnail. However, I will say that there are functions that we now can use to manage thumbnails and scripts and so on. So in Manage, I haven't played with this at all, but I should have a script step in here called get thumbnail or something. Let's see if I'm going to punt here. This is probably a bad thing for me to do something I don't know how to do. But yeah, there's somewhere in here, I believe somewhere in here, there is a either a script step or a, yeah, I'm not going to get it. Yeah, there are tools, I'll put it that way, that I don't know how to use, that allow you to get a thumbnail of an image and get that on the fly. Excuse me. So, you could, I suppose, not store at the global file level, and this is just me talking off the cuff, not store at the global file level this concept of store as thumbnails, but then get thumbnails when you need them using some kind of script or calculation.
Okay, is FileMaker smart enough to use the one thumbnail, or permanent or temp, even if the same container field is on multiple layouts and with multiple dimensions?
I would hope so, but I don't know the answer.
Okay. Can the server be controlled from a remote location, backups, etc.? I guess via the FileMaker Administrator console is the answer to that. Can the server be controlled, backups, etc.?
So server admin console, you can set your server to allow connections via server admin console from outside itself. So you can get to the server admin console. Getting to the server is easy as an RDC connection.
Okay. If two different but identically named files are imported into the same container field on different records, does one overwrite the other, or will FMS rename one of them accordingly?
I am going to punt and say that the FileMaker engineers are smarter.
Smart enough, yeah.
I don't know exactly how it's handled, but I'm sure it's handled.
That's a case that it probably came up in testing. Let's just say that they definitely did that properly. If you're restoring from a backup, how do you restore all the external container info also?
Well, that's a good question. So when you upload a database, and I haven't actually done this, but I think I understand how it is done. When you upload a database and you select the database, you are also prompted to upload the remote container contents. And I'm not going to do it right, but we will just let me get out of here. I'll go ahead and close this guy. Oh yeah, I'm in it, so I'm going to get a complaint, close, and that's all right. And my database is it closed yet? Yeah, it's closed. All right, let's say I take this guy and I'm going to remove it. Let's see. Remove. Okay. So I'm going to remove it, and it can't because of something going on with my installation. I don't know what it is. But basically, when you remove a database, you should also be allowed to download the container data, and there's a merge option where it can pull it all into the file. And conversely, when you upload a database, you should be able to upload the database images. Now, bear in mind, I haven't done it, so I may be talking trash. I don't know.
Great.
Yes. I believe my answer is they have thought about it. There is a way to do it. I'm not going to demonstrate it well.
Does remote storage work with instant web publishing?
Remote storage works with instant web publishing. Yes. Yes. I think the answer is yes.
Okay. Streaming
is different somehow, and I'm trying to remember how. It's something to do with the encryption. There are nuances there. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think you should probably do your own research on that rather than take my word for granted.
Okay. We've got a comment, too, that says, get thumbnail is a new calc function.
Thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Stephen. When using FileMaker with PHP, does a container content get streamed from the FileMaker engine, or is it uploaded directly from the web server?
I don't know the answer offhand. I will say that it is handled by a separate process from FileMaker Server, so I believe it's the same process that delivers it both ways.
All right. And then we've got one more. Can you get FM to rename its stored copy of the file being imported? For example, a customer is on FM job record number 1234 and imports an image called mypicture.jpg. But we want it renamed and saved using the job number 1234.jpg. Does this type of functionality still require a plugin? I guess renaming of a container file on import of it?
Yeah, it's not going to do that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't think so. Yeah. So that would definitely require a plugin, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
And I don't think you would be able to interact with the external, the remote stored data in that way.
All right. So we have, I think there might have been a couple of other questions that if we have 2 more minutes. I've got, okay, here we go. That's answered already, sorry. Okay. Oh, compress this file. Is this still okay to use? I guess save as compressed, something like that? Save as compacted? Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Definitely still available and still a viable option for reducing the file size.
Yes.
And can we show a restore of a database with associated externally stored container info? Probably not the next minute.
Oh, no.
No. But
yeah. That would be a separate demo. I'm not prepared
maybe
to get into it right now.
Maybe a separate blog post as well, which we could do. But that sounds very interesting. So that is it for the questions. We'll summarize as well with a follow-up blog post that we'll have on the FileMakerAcademy.com website. It's FM Academy. We'll have that up next week. Thank you guys very much, and enjoy your day.
I'm just going to point out there are resources available. There are not 5 of them. There are 3 of them. I don't know why I put in 5. There are probably 5. But Stephen Blackwell and Wim Decourt have an excellent set of papers called The Technical Narratives that they posted on FM forums. You can find it there. It's a very comprehensive resource. It's worth looking into. The FileMaker 12 Getting Started Guide, believe it or not, has a lot of good information in it, and you should be reading it. The whole read the manual thing, it really applies here. There's a lot of changes. And then the Server Advanced Release Notes, there's a link here. It's the document 10248. That lists a lot of the key changes between the new functionality in the product that's worth getting into. You can contact us at info@intsolutions.inc.com. And this is our blog. Feel free to go there. And we already did this part, so don't raise your hand. And thank you. And go to fmacademy.com for updates.
Yep, and we've got another webinar coming up on Tuesday, so please stay tuned. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.